Welcome and settle in. Tonight, we journey backward through time, to an era when the invisible remained truly invisible. To centuries when humanity faced terrors they could not name, could not see, and could not understand. Before microscopes revealed hidden worlds. Before laboratories decoded the secrets of contagion. Before science gave us words like virus, bacteria, or pathogen. For thousands of years, our ancestors lived alongside invisible enemies. They watched as fevers struck without warning. They saw pustules bloom across skin in patterns they could not explain. They witnessed entire villages emptied by plagues that arrived like whispers on the wind and departed leaving only silence and graves. They knew something was causing these horrors, but what? The question haunted civilization after civilization, generation after generation. This is not a story of answers. This is a story of questions. Of the long centuries when humanity groped in darkness, trying to understand forces beyond their perception. Of brilliant minds who came tantalizingly close to truth, only to be led astray by the limitations of their time. Of ordinary people who did their best to protect their families with nothing but folklore, prayer, and desperate hope. Tonight, as you relax into rest, let us travel together through this vanished world. We will meet the ancient physicians who believed sickness arose from imbalanced humors. We will stand beside medieval villagers who thought bad air carried death. We will witness the terror of epidemics that seemed like divine judgment. And we will remember that for most of human history, disease was not a puzzle to be solved, but a mystery to be endured. The story begins long before recorded history, in the shadows of prehistory where our earliest ancestors first encountered these invisible foes. But our journey truly gains focus in the ancient civilizations that left us written records. In the scrolls and tablets and codices where physicians and scribes documented suffering they could observe but never fully comprehend. So breathe deeply. Let your body settle. And prepare to witness 4,000 years of human struggle against enemies that left no trace but devastation. In the beginning, there were no doctors as we know them. There were shamans, healers, priests. Medicine was not separate from magic, from religion, from the spirit world. When illness struck, the first explanation was always the supernatural. A curse from an enemy. Punishment from the gods. Possession by evil spirits. The body was a battleground where invisible forces waged war, and the healer's job was to intercede with powers beyond human understanding. The ancient Mesopotamians, who built cities between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers more than 4,000 years ago, left us some of the earliest written records of disease. In their cuneiform tablets, we find remedies and incantations. They believed demons caused illness, entities with names and personalities, each responsible for specific symptoms. The demon Namtar brought fever. The demon Lamashta preyed on pregnant women and infants. To cure disease meant appeasing or banishing these spirits through ritual, prayer, and carefully prepared potions. But alongside the supernatural, something else stirred. The beginning of observation. The ancient Mesopotamians noticed patterns. They saw that certain conditions followed predictable courses. That some illnesses spread from person to person while others did not. In the Code of Hammurabi from around 1750 BCE, we find laws about physicians' responsibilities. And in the even older laws of Eshnunna from around 2300 BCE, we encounter one of history's first references to a specific disease we can identify today: rabies. The law stated that if a dog became rabid and bit someone, causing death, the dog's owner had to pay a steep fine. They knew that a mad dog's bite brought death. They did not know why, but they knew the connection. Across the ancient world, in the Indus Valley Civilization and in ancient China, similar patterns emerged. Healers observed. They documented. They sought to categorize diseases and understand their courses. But without any conception of microorganisms, their explanations remained rooted in the visible world and the spiritual realm. The ancient Egyptians, master builders and keepers of detailed records, left us glimpses of their medical knowledge in papyri that survived millennia. The Ebers Papyrus, dating to around 1550 BCE, contains hundreds of remedies and describes numerous conditions. The ancient Egyptians were skilled surgeons. They could set bones, remove tumors, perform basic operations. They understood that the heart pumped something through the body, though they thought it was air, not blood. They practiced dentistry, created prosthetics, and mummified bodies with such skill that we can still examine their work thousands of years later. And in those mummies, we find evidence of diseases that plagued ancient Egypt. Tuberculosis has been identified in Egyptian remains. Malaria, parasitic infections, and most intriguingly, on the mummified face of Pharaoh Ramesses V, who died around 1157 BCE, researchers have found what many believe to be scarring from smallpox. Small, raised pustules preserved in death. The identification remains debated among scholars, as some recent genetic studies suggest smallpox may have evolved more recently than these ancient cases would indicate. Yet the lesion pattern on the pharaohs remains closely matches what we would expect from smallpox, suggesting that if not this exact virus, something very similar afflicted ancient Egypt thousands of years ago. But the ancient Egyptians did not know what caused these conditions. Like the Mesopotamians, they attributed illness to supernatural causes, though they also recognized natural factors. They understood that wounds could become infected, that certain foods or environmental conditions affected health. They practiced basic hygiene, understanding that cleanliness somehow related to wellness, though not understanding the mechanisms. It was in ancient Greece that medical thinking began to shift more deliberately toward natural causes. The philosopher-physician Hippocrates, who lived around 460 to 370 BCE, is often called the father of medicine because he and his followers attempted to explain disease through observation and reason rather than supernatural intervention. The Hippocratic Corpus, a collection of medical texts from this period, represents a revolutionary approach to understanding the human body and its ailments. Central to Greek medical thought was the theory of the four humors. This elegant system proposed that the human body contained four fundamental fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health represented a perfect balance among these four humors. Illness occurred when the balance was disrupted. Too much blood led to fever and inflammation. Too much phlegm caused colds and sluggishness. Too much yellow bile brought violent illnesses and fever. Too much black bile resulted in melancholy and dark moods. This theory was wrong, of course. Completely wrong in its particulars. And yet, it represented something profound, an attempt to understand disease through observable patterns in the natural world. The Greeks noticed that people with fevers were flushed and warm, as if they had too much blood. People with head colds produced phlegm. Jaundice turned skin and eyes yellow. Depression seemed to darken the spirit. The theory of humors was an attempt to create a unified framework that explained all these observations. Treatment followed logically from this theory. If illness resulted from imbalance, treatment meant restoring balance. Bloodletting, one of medicine's most persistent practices, aimed to reduce excess blood. Purging and vomiting expelled other excess humors. Diet, exercise, rest, and even one's emotional state all mattered because they affected the humor's balance. A physician's job was to understand each patient's unique constitution and prescribe remedies to restore equilibrium. The Greek physician Galen, who lived in the 2nd century CE, expanded and systematized humoral theory. His work dominated Western medicine for more than 1,000 years. Galen was a brilliant anatomist who dissected animals and described organs and systems with remarkable accuracy. But like all physicians of his era, he could not see what was invisible. He could not perceive bacteria or viruses. He could only observe symptoms and theorize about causes. The Romans, inheritors of Greek medical knowledge, added their own contributions. They were master engineers who understood that public health required infrastructure. Roman aqueducts brought fresh water into cities. Roman sewers carried waste away. Public baths, while perhaps incubators for some diseases, also promoted cleanliness. The Romans understood empirically that sanitation mattered, even if they didn't understand why. The Roman writer Varro, in the 1st century BCE, wrote something remarkable. He warned about building near swamps because, he said, they bred certain minute creatures which cannot be seen by the eyes, which float in the air and enter the body through the mouth and nose and cause serious diseases. This was an extraordinary intuition, though Varro was likely thinking about visible insects like mosquitoes rather than invisible microorganisms. Still, the idea that unseen creatures might cause disease was hovering at the edge of human understanding, flickering in and out of view across different cultures and eras. But this insight didn't take hold. Instead, another theory dominated: miasma. The miasma theory held that disease came from bad air, from foul odors, from the stench of rot and decay. When plague struck a city, people smelled the corruption of unburied bodies, the stink of sewers, the foul air of crowded streets. The connection seemed obvious. Bad smells caused disease. Miasma theory seemed to explain epidemics perfectly. When illness swept through crowded urban areas with poor sanitation, where terrible odors prevailed, the link appeared self-evident. This belief persisted for centuries, alongside humoral theory. The two weren't contradictory. Bad air could imbalance the humors. Foul environments could corrupt the body's internal harmony. Ancient and medieval physicians wove together these theories, creating elaborate explanations for diseases whose true causes remained invisible. In ancient China and India, different but parallel systems developed. Traditional Chinese medicine understood health as the balance of yin and yang, of 5 elements, of vital energy flowing through channels in the body. Indian Ayurvedic medicine also emphasized balance, describing 3 fundamental energies or dashas that govern bodily functions. These systems, like Greek humoral theory, were sophisticated attempts to create frameworks for understanding health and disease without knowledge of microscopic organisms. And yet, across all these civilizations, there were moments of remarkable insight. The ancient Indians practiced an early form of inoculation against smallpox, deliberately exposing people to material from smallpox sores to provide protection. Chinese physicians, perhaps as early as the 10th century CE, developed variolation, inhaling dried smallpox scabs to prevent severe disease. They did not understand viruses or immunity, but they observed that surviving smallpox provided lifelong protection. They found ways to harness this observation, creating crude but effective preventive measures. These ancient peoples were not ignorant or foolish. They were brilliant observers working within the limits of their perception. They saw patterns. They developed treatments. Some remedies worked through mechanisms they could not have understood. Willow bark tea for pain contained salicylic acid, the precursor to aspirin. Mold-covered bread placed on wounds sometimes contained natural antibiotics. Isolation of the sick, practiced in many cultures, slowed disease spread even when people believed it was bad air rather than contagion they were avoiding. But without the ability to see microorganisms, without understanding that invisible living things could invade the body and multiply, causing disease, they were limited. They could describe symptoms exquisitely. They could document disease courses with great precision. They could develop elaborate theoretical frameworks. But they could not identify causes. They could not know that when pestilence swept through their cities, it was carried not by bad air, not by imbalanced humors, not by divine wrath, but by invisible organisms too small for any human eye to see. And so for thousands of years, disease remained fundamentally mysterious. A force of nature as unpredictable as earthquakes or storms. Something to be endured, managed, survived if possible, but never truly understood or controlled. The invisible world remained invisible. The microscopic remained beyond imagination. Of all the diseases that haunted humanity before the age of science, few inspire such horror as smallpox. For thousands of years, it was one of the most feared afflictions on earth. It struck without warning. It killed without mercy. And those it spared often carried its marks for life, their faces scarred by the pockmarks that gave the disease its name. Smallpox probably emerged as a human disease sometime between 3,000 and 4,000 years ago, though its ultimate origins remain uncertain. Most likely, it jumped from an animal host to humans during the earliest agricultural settlements in northeastern Africa, when our ancestors first began domesticating animals and living in denser populations. Once established in human communities, smallpox became a permanent fixture of civilized life, a disease that would shape history for millennia. The earliest physical evidence comes from those Egyptian mummies. The preserved remains of people who died 3,000 years ago show telltale marks. Ramesses V, pharaoh of Egypt, died in his 30s with his face covered in raised pustules. Whether this was definitely smallpox cannot be proven with absolute certainty, but the pattern of scarring is highly suggestive. If it was smallpox, then this disease plagued the most powerful rulers of the ancient world as readily as it struck the poorest peasant. The earliest written descriptions come from ancient India and China. In India, the Sushruta Samhita, a Sanskrit medical text compiled before 400 CE, describes a disease with symptoms unmistakably like smallpox. The pustules are red, yellow, and white, and they are accompanied by burning pain. The skin seems studded with grains of rice. The description is precise, clinical, the work of physicians who had seen this disease many times and knew its course intimately. In China, descriptions of a smallpox-like disease appear as early as the 4th century CE. The Chinese called it heavenly flowers or pain of heaven, names that reflect both the appearance of the pustules blooming across skin and the sense that this was a divine affliction. Chinese medical texts describe not just the symptoms but the disease's progression, its different forms, its outcomes. They knew that those who survived would never catch it again. This observation was crucial and would eventually lead to the practice of variolation. For ancient peoples, smallpox must have seemed like a visitation from the gods. It appeared suddenly, spreading through families and communities with terrifying speed. First came fever, headache, terrible pain in the back and limbs. The afflicted person would seem desperately ill for several days. Then the rash would appear, starting in the mouth and throat, spreading to the face, arms, and legs. Small red spots that became raised bumps. The bumps filled with thick, opaque fluid, becoming pustules that could merge together, transforming the skin into a landscape of horror. The course of the disease typically took about a month from first symptoms to resolution or death. For those who survived, the pustules would eventually scab over and fall off, leaving deep pitted scars. Many survivors were left blind, the virus having damaged their eyes. Others lost fingers or limbs to secondary infections. The scarring was so distinctive that survivors could be identified at a glance for the rest of their lives. But what caused this horror? Ancient peoples developed various explanations. In India, smallpox was personified as a goddess, Shaitala, who both caused and cured the disease. She was worshipped in temples throughout the country. Offerings were made to appease her. Rituals performed to gain her favor. The disease was understood as possession by this deity. If someone recovered, Shaitala had released them. If they died, she had claimed them. This belief persisted for centuries, and in some communities, vestiges remain even today. In West Africa, the Yoruba people attributed smallpox to the god Sabona, also called Shabona or Shapona. He was feared and respected, a deity of the earth and disease who could punish individuals or entire communities. Like Shaitala, Sabona was both the cause of smallpox and its potential cure. Priests of Sabona held considerable power, as they were believed to be able to invoke or avert the disease. In Europe and the Middle East, where monotheistic religions dominated, smallpox was often seen as divine punishment for sin, either individual or collective. When epidemics swept through cities, religious leaders called for repentance, prayer, and moral reform. The disease was God's judgment, and the only hope was to beg for mercy. These religious and supernatural explanations coexisted with more practical observations. People noticed that smallpox spread from person to person, that those who nursed the sick often fell ill themselves, that bedding and clothing from victims seemed to carry contagion. In response, some communities practiced isolation, keeping the sick separated from the healthy. This worked to some degree, slowing transmission even though no one understood the mechanism. The most remarkable development was the invention of variolation. The practice seems to have arisen independently in several regions, including China, India, and parts of Africa. The principle was simple but brilliant: deliberately expose a healthy person to material from a mild case of smallpox to provide protection against the more severe natural disease. In China, the technique called insufflation involved taking scabs from smallpox pustules, grinding them into powder, and blowing the powder into the nostril of a healthy person through a silver or ivory tube. The right nostril for boys, the left nostril for girls, according to tradition. The person would typically develop a mild case of smallpox and recover with lifelong immunity. In India and the Middle East, practitioners used a different method. They would take material from a pustule and scratch it into the skin of a healthy person's arm or leg. Again, the goal was to induce a mild case that would prevent severe disease later. These practices were remarkably effective, though not without risk. Most people who underwent variolation developed only a mild illness and gained immunity. But some developed full-blown smallpox and died or suffered severe complications. The mortality rate from variolation was perhaps 1 to 2%, compared to 20 to 30% from naturally acquired smallpox. The calculus was grim but clear: variolation was dangerous, but natural smallpox was far worse. The knowledge of variolation spread slowly westward along trade routes. By the 17th century, it was practiced in the Ottoman Empire. In 1721, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, wife of the British ambassador to Constantinople, had her children variolated in Turkey and then introduced the practice to England when she returned. It was initially met with skepticism and resistance but gradually gained acceptance, particularly after members of the royal family were variolated successfully. Yet no one understood why it worked. The fact that having smallpox once provided lifelong protection was obvious from observation. But the mechanism remained a complete mystery. Was it because the body learned to recognize the disease? Was it because some internal balance was permanently altered? Theories abounded, but none came close to the truth that the immune system developed specific defenses against the virus after exposure. As trade routes expanded and empires grew, smallpox spread across the globe. It was probably already present in Europe, Asia, and Africa by the Middle Ages. But when European explorers and conquerors reached the Americas in the late 15th century, they brought smallpox to populations that had never encountered it. The results were catastrophic beyond measure. The indigenous peoples of the Americas had no immunity to smallpox. When the disease arrived, it swept through communities like wildfire through dry grass. In Mexico, smallpox decimated the Aztec Empire, killing millions. The Emperor Cuitlahuac died of smallpox in 1520, shortly after Spanish conquistadors brought the disease. In South America, smallpox raced ahead of the Spanish invasion, reaching the Inca Empire before the conquistadors themselves arrived. It killed the Emperor Huayna Capac and his designated successor, plunging the empire into civil war that made Spanish conquest possible. Estimates suggest that smallpox and other Old World diseases killed somewhere between 60 and 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas. Entire civilizations collapsed. Communities that had existed for centuries were erased. The demographic catastrophe was so profound that it altered the entire course of history, enabling European colonization and reshaping the world. Yet to both the Europeans and the indigenous peoples, this appeared to be divine will. The Christians saw it as God clearing the land for Christian settlement. The indigenous peoples, seeing these bearded strangers bring death and destruction, might have seen it as punishment from their own gods or as evidence of the invaders' supernatural power. Neither side understood that what was killing millions was not God's favor or wrath, but a virus. A tiny organism that had evolved with old world populations for thousands of years, allowing those populations to develop some level of immunity through countless generations of exposure, while the peoples of the Americas remained completely vulnerable. In 18th century Europe, smallpox was simply a fact of life. It was one of the leading causes of death, killing an estimated 400,000 Europeans each year. It killed rich and poor alike. 6 European monarchs died of smallpox, including Louis XV of France in 1774. Nearly everyone encountered the disease at some point. Those who survived childhood without contracting it lived in constant fear. Parents watched their children develop the first symptoms with dread, knowing that perhaps 1 in 3 would not survive. The disease was called many names. In English it was smallpox to distinguish it from the great pox of syphilis. In Latin it was variola, from various meaning spotted or varus meaning mark on the skin. Whatever the name, the reality was the same, a disease that killed millions, blinded millions more, and left survivors marked for life. And through all these centuries, no one knew what caused it. Physicians could describe its course with exquisite precision. They knew it spread through contact. They knew survival brought immunity. They had developed variolation to prevent it. But they did not know it was a virus. Could not have known, because viruses were smaller than anything they could imagine, smaller than anything their instruments could detect, so small that they passed through the finest filters, invisible ghosts that killed with perfect efficiency. The mystery of smallpox would begin to unlock only at the very end of the 18th century, in rural England, with a country physician named Edward Jenner. But that story belongs to the later part of our journey. For now, we remain in the age when smallpox was simply one of humanity's constant companions. A disease that shaped empires and humbled kings. A disease that seemed to come from nowhere and strike without reason. An invisible terror that would haunt humanity for 4,000 years before finally meeting its end in one of medicine's greatest triumphs. If smallpox was humanity's longest companion, the Black Death was its most devastating visitation. Between 1347 and 1353, a disease swept across Europe and Asia with such terrifying speed and lethality that it fundamentally altered civilization. It killed, by most estimates, between 30 and 50% of Europe's population, perhaps 25 to 50 million people. Some particularly hard-hit regions lost as much as 80% of their inhabitants. Entire villages were abandoned, left to decay with no one living to remember the names of the dead. This was plague. Specifically, bubonic plague, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, though also appearing in pneumonic and septicemic forms. But to the people of the 14th century, this was simply death itself, come to claim the world. Plague had visited humanity before. Historical accounts suggest that plagues struck the ancient world, though identifying them with certainty is difficult. The plague of Athens during the Peloponnesian War, the Antonine plague in the Roman Empire, the plague of Justinian in the 6th century, all probably involved bacterial or viral diseases, though scholars debate the specific culprits. But the Black Death was different in scale and impact. It hit a medieval Europe already weakened by famine, already struggling, and it struck with such force that the world that emerged afterward was fundamentally transformed. The plague arrived in Europe in October 1347, when 12 Genoese trading ships docked at the Sicilian port of Messina. They had come from the Black Sea, from the Crimean port of Kaffa, where they had been caught in a siege. The Mongol army besieging Kaffa had plague in its ranks. According to some accounts, the Mongols catapulted corpses of plague victims over the city walls, though whether this actually spread the disease or whether the plague entered through other means remains uncertain. What is clear is that the Genoese ships that escaped carried plague with them. When the ships arrived in Messina, people gathered at the docks to greet them. What they found horrified them. Most sailors aboard were dead. Those who lived were gravely ill, covered in strange black boils that oozed blood and pus. Sicilian authorities ordered the ships out of the harbor immediately, but it was already too late. The plague had come ashore. From Sicily, it spread with nightmarish speed. Within months, it reached mainland Italy. By 1348, it had swept through France, Spain, and England. By 1349, it was in Germany and Scandinavia. By 1352, it had reached Russia. No corner of Europe was spared except a few isolated pockets, including the remote alpine village of Oberammergau, which isolated itself and, according to legend, was spared after making a vow to perform a passion play every 10 years in gratitude. The symptoms were horrific. First came fever, chills, weakness, terrible aches. Then the characteristic buboes appeared, swollen and painful lymph nodes in the groin, armpits, or neck, growing as large as apples or eggs, turning black as they filled with blood. The pain was excruciating. Victims vomited blood. Some developed red or purple blotches on their skin. Most died within 3 to 5 days of symptoms appearing, though some died within hours. The speed was as terrifying as the symptoms. The pneumonic form was even worse. When the infection reached the lungs, victims coughed up blood and could spread the disease through the air. Pneumonic plague killed even faster than bubonic and was more contagious. There were also cases of septicemic plague, where the infection entered the bloodstream directly, killing before buboes even appeared. Medieval Europeans, lacking any conception of bacteria, had no idea what caused this catastrophe. They reached for the explanations available to them, blending natural observation with supernatural terror. The plague must be a punishment from God. This was the most common explanation. Europe had sinned, and God was showing his wrath. The remedy, therefore, was repentance, prayer, and demonstrations of faith. Groups of flatulents roamed from town to town, whipping themselves in public displays of penance, believing that taking the punishment of sin upon themselves might appease God's anger. They marched in processions, chanting and bleating, gathering crowds wherever they went. For a time they were immensely popular, but eventually church authorities banned them, fearing their influence and suspecting heresy. People also turned to more immediate, visible explanations. The miasma theory seemed to explain the plague perfectly. The disease struck cities with poor sanitation, where the air was thick with the stench of waste and decay. Clearly, the poison air was causing death. People closed their windows, burned aromatic herbs and incense to purify the air, and held pomanders and nosegays to their noses when venturing outside. Physicians, such as they were, wore strange beak-like masks stuffed with aromatic substances, believing this would protect them from the miasmatic air. These plague doctor masks, with their long beaks and glassy eyes, became one of the enduring images of the Black Death, a symbol of medicine's helplessness in the face of catastrophe. Some blamed the alignment of planets. In 1345, a conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars had occurred, and astrologers warned that this cosmic event would bring disaster. When plague struck 2 years later, many saw confirmation of this prediction. Others blamed earthquakes, which had indeed occurred in Europe in 1348, believing that these upheavals released poisonous vapors from the earth. And inevitably, people looked for scapegoats. In many parts of Europe, Jewish communities were blamed for the plague, accused of poisoning wells to kill Christians. This was obvious nonsense, as Jews were dying of plague at the same rate as Christians, but fear and superstition overrode reason. Entire Jewish communities were massacred in waves of violence that swept through the German states and elsewhere. In Strasbourg, 2,000 Jews were burned alive. In Mainz, 12,000 were killed. The persecution of Jews during the Black Death was one of the darkest chapters in an already dark time. The actual cause of the plague, Yersinia pestis, is a bacterium that lives in rodents, particularly rats, and is spread by fleas. When a flea bites an infected rat and then bites a human, it can transmit the bacteria. Once in the human bloodstream, the bacteria multiply rapidly, causing the characteristic symptoms of plague. The pneumonic form develops when the infection reaches the lungs and becomes airborne. The septicemic form occurs when the bacteria enter the bloodstream directly. Medieval Europeans did notice that plague seemed to follow trade routes, spreading from port to port, city to city. They noticed it seemed contagious, that those who cared for the sick often fell ill themselves. Some cities implemented quarantine measures, isolating the sick or requiring ships to anchor offshore for 40 days, the origin of the word quarantine from the Italian quaranta meaning 40, before unloading cargo. These measures helped somewhat, slowing but never stopping the disease's spread. But they did not think to blame rats. Rats were everywhere in medieval cities, so common as to be unremarkable. And fleas were simply a fact of life, something everyone dealt with constantly. The idea that these ubiquitous pests were carrying death would not occur to anyone until much later. The social and economic impact of the Black Death was staggering. With a third to half of the population dead, labor became scarce and valuable. Peasants who survived found they could demand higher wages and better conditions. The feudal system, already weakening, received a moral blow. Lords who had relied on abundant cheap labor suddenly had to compete for workers. Social mobility increased. The rigid hierarchies of medieval society began to crack. The psychological impact was equally profound. The certainty with which death could strike anyone at any time fundamentally altered medieval culture. Art became obsessed with death and decay. The danse macabre, the dance of death, became a common theme, showing skeletons leading people from all walks of life, from popes to peasants, in a dance to the grave. Memento mori, remember you must die, became a watchword. Life became more precious because it was so obviously fragile. The church's authority was shaken. People had prayed desperately, and their prayers had not been answered. Priests died at higher rates than the general population because they attended to the sick. The Church's inability to stop the plague or even explain it raised fundamental questions about its spiritual power. And yet, even in the midst of this catastrophe, there were moments of extraordinary compassion. Nurses and physicians who stayed to tend the sick knowing they would likely die themselves. Communities that cared for orphans and widows. Families that took in neighbors' children when the parents died. Humanity persisted even in the darkest times. The Black Death receded by 1353, but plague did not disappear. It returned in waves throughout the following centuries, though never again with quite the same apocalyptic intensity. There were major outbreaks in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries. The Great Plague of London in 1665 killed perhaps 100,000 people, about a fifth of the city's population. Each recurrence brought the same terror, the same desperate search for explanations and cures. Through it all, the true cause remained hidden. Physicians developed elaborate theories. They wrote treatises on the nature of plague, its causes, its treatments. Some of these treatments were sensible, if ineffective, like isolating the sick. Others were bizarre or actively harmful, like bloodletting, which weakened patients who were already desperately ill. But without knowledge of bacteria, without microscopes, without any conception that invisible organisms could cause disease, physicians were fighting blind. The plague doctors with their beaked masks became experts at describing symptoms and predicting outcomes, but they could not prevent or cure the disease. They walked through plague-stricken streets, chronicling death, collecting their fees, and dying at alarming rates. They were brave, certainly, but also powerless in the face of a foe they could not see or understand. Only in the late 19th century would the mystery of plague finally be solved. In 1894, Alexander Yersin, a Swiss-French bacteriologist, identified Yersinia pestis as the cause of plague during an epidemic in Hong Kong. The bacteria was named after him. A few years later, Paul Louis Simon demonstrated that fleas carried the disease from rats to humans. Finally, after 600 years since the Black Death, the mechanism was understood. But in the 14th century, in the midst of the pandemic, there was no such understanding. Only terror, suffering, and death on an unimaginable scale. And the question that haunted every survivor, why? Why had this happened? What had caused such horror? The answers they created, supernatural and natural, reflected their worldview and their limitations. They could only work with what they knew and what they could observe. And what they observed was death without visible cause, striking down the virtuous and the wicked alike, transforming bustling cities into silent graveyards, and leaving the survivors to wonder if the end of the world had finally come. Among all the diseases that terrorized humanity before the age of microbiology, rabies held a special place of horror. Unlike smallpox or plague, which killed through fever and pustules or buboes, rabies destroyed the mind first. It turned victims into something less than human, creatures of rage and hydrophobia who foamed at the mouth and snapped at those trying to help them. And unlike other diseases that might spare some victims, rabies was, until the very end of the 19th century, absolutely fatal once symptoms appeared. Rabies is one of the oldest diseases known to humanity. References to rabid dogs appear in the Code of Eshnunna from ancient Mesopotamia around 2300 BCE, making it one of the first specific diseases mentioned in human writing. The ancient Mesopotamians knew that a mad dog's bite brought death, though they could not have understood why. They created laws to deal with rabid animals and their owners, recognizing the danger even if they couldn't explain it. In ancient Greece, rabies was described in detail by several medical writers. The word itself comes from the Latin rabere, meaning to rage, but the Greeks called it lyssa, from their word for madness. Aristotle wrote about rabies in animals in the 4th century BCE, noting that dogs could become mad and that their bite could spread the madness to other animals and to humans. He observed that while the disease could affect many species, humans seemed particularly vulnerable once bitten. The Greek physician Celsus, writing in the 1st century CE, provided a vivid clinical description of rabies in humans. The patient can neither stand the sight of light, nor endure the sight of water. He is restless, he cannot sleep, the mind is disturbed, and often he barks like a dog. This description of hydrophobia, the fear of water, was particularly notable. Rabies victims would become terribly thirsty but could not swallow water. The muscles of the throat would spasm at the sight or sound of water, causing terrible pain. They would beg for water and then recoil from it in terror, trapped in torment. The symptoms of rabies follow a predictable and horrible pattern. After being bitten by a rabid animal, there is typically an incubation period of 1 to 3 months, though it can be as short as a week or as long as a year. During this time, the victim shows no symptoms. The virus, for rabies is caused by a virus in the lyssavirus genus, travels slowly along nerve pathways toward the brain. The distance from the bite to the brain determines how long this takes. A bite on the face or neck results in faster onset than a bite on the foot. The first symptoms are often subtle: fever, headache, general discomfort. The bite wound itself might tingle or hurt. Then the disease enters its acute phase, and the real horror begins. There are 2 forms: furious rabies and paralytic rabies. In the furious form, which is more common, the victim becomes hyperactive, anxious, confused. They have periods of lucidity alternating with episodes of rage and violence. The hallmark symptom of hydrophobia appears. Attempts to drink cause painful throat spasms. Even thinking about water can trigger them. Eventually, the victim becomes unable to swallow at all, foaming at the mouth with accumulated saliva. As the disease progresses, the victim experiences hallucinations and terror. They may bite, scratch, and attack anyone near them, spreading infection through their saliva. The end comes through paralysis, coma, and respiratory failure. From first symptoms to death typically takes less than a week. Throughout history, until the advent of modern intensive care, the case fatality rate was 100%. Once symptoms appeared, death was certain. Ancient physicians tried desperately to treat rabies, but their remedies were useless. The Roman encyclopedist Celsus recommended cauterizing the wound with a hot iron immediately after being bitten, trying to burn out the infection before it could spread. This occasionally worked, but only if done immediately and thoroughly enough to destroy the virus before it entered the nervous system. Most attempts failed. Other remedies were pure superstition, applying hair from the rabid dog to the wound, various herbal poultices, prayers, and incantations. Nothing helped once the virus reached the brain. The association between rabies and water took on mythological dimensions. Some cultures believed that looking at one's reflection in water while infected would cause madness. Others thought that victims needed to avoid all water or risk the disease spreading to contaminate water sources. The fear became so ingrained that hydrophobia became synonymous with rabies itself. Medieval Europeans lived in terror of mad dogs. When a dog began showing signs of rabies, foaming at the mouth, becoming aggressive, behaving strangely, the community would try to kill it immediately. But in the confusion and panic, the dog might bite several people before being stopped. Then there would be the agonizing wait to see if those bitten would develop symptoms. Weeks or months might pass with the victims knowing they might be doomed but unable to do anything about it. Various folk remedies circulated. The mad stone was one such supposed cure. These were calculi, stone-like objects found in the stomachs of deer, cattle, or other animals. If applied to a rabies bite wound, believers claimed, the mad stone would stick to the wound and draw out the poison. When it fell off, the person was supposedly cured. These stones were treasured family heirlooms, passed down through generations. Of course, they had no actual effect, but desperate people grasped at any hope. Because rabies was transmitted through bites from animals, particularly dogs, it was one of the few diseases where the mechanism of transmission was relatively clear. People knew that a rabid animal's bite spread the disease. They did not understand why, but the connection was obvious. This made rabies different from diseases like smallpox or plague, where the actual mode of transmission was mysterious. Yet even knowing that bites spread rabies didn't help prevent or treat it. The outcome remained inevitable. The psychological horror of rabies cannot be overstated. Imagine being bitten by a dog, then waiting weeks or months wondering if you will develop symptoms. If you do, you know with absolute certainty that you will die, and die horribly, losing your mind before your body fails. You will become a thing of terror to your loved ones, dangerous to those who try to care for you. You will die in agony, consumed by thirst you cannot quench, driven mad by a disease that destroys your very sense of self. Literature and folklore absorbed this horror. Werewolf legends may have been influenced by rabies. The idea of a person transforming into a violent beast, foam at the mouth, attacking others, has obvious parallels to furious rabies. Medieval accounts of supposed werewolves often describe symptoms consistent with rabies. Whether any actual werewolf accusations involved rabies victims is debated, but the connection is suggestive. Rabies also affected the relationship between humans and dogs. Dogs have been humanity's companions for thousands of years, domesticated long before any other animal. They were helpers, protectors, friends. But they could also carry death. A beloved family dog could suddenly turn violent, attacking and biting, spreading fatal disease. This betrayal made rabies even more psychologically devastating. The creature that was supposed to protect you could become your killer. In the 18th and 19th centuries, as European cities grew, stray dog populations exploded. Periodic rabies outbreaks led to mass cullings, with authorities ordering all stray dogs killed. Dog owners were required to keep their animals confined or leashed. These public health measures reduced rabies transmission but couldn't eliminate it. Wild animals, wolves, foxes, bats also carried rabies and could infect domestic animals or humans. Throughout all these centuries, physicians and scientists tried to understand what rabies was and how it spread. They knew it was transmitted through bites. They could describe its symptoms in exquisite detail. But they could not see the virus. Rabies virus is too small to be seen with ordinary microscopes. It wasn't until the late 19th century, with improved microscopy and the development of virology as a science, that anyone would even know viruses existed. The breakthrough came from Louis Pasteur, the French chemist and microbiologist whose work revolutionized our understanding of infectious disease. In the 1880s, Pasteur turned his attention to rabies. He could not see the organism that caused it. The virus was too small even for his microscopes, but he hypothesized that something was there, something that could be weakened and used to create immunity. Working with rabbits, Pasteur developed a vaccine using dried spinal cord tissue from infected animals. The drying process weakened the virus, making it safe to inject without causing disease. In 1885, a 9-year-old boy named Joseph Meister was brought to Pasteur after being badly bitten by a rabid dog. The boy faced certain death. Pasteur, though not a physician and deeply anxious about the ethics of human experimentation, administered his vaccine. Joseph Meister survived. Rabies, for the first time in human history, had been defeated. But this triumph belongs to a later chapter of our story. For thousands of years before Pasteur, rabies remained an absolute death sentence. Ancient Mesopotamians, Greeks, Romans, medieval Europeans, people across the world and across the centuries, all lived with the knowledge that a single bite could condemn them to a death so horrible that suicide was considered a mercy. They tried every remedy they could imagine, from cauterization to charms to prayer. Nothing worked. The virus was invisible, unstoppable, and absolutely lethal. Rabies teaches us something profound about the pre-scientific understanding of disease. Even when the mechanism of transmission was relatively clear, even when physicians could describe the disease course with perfect accuracy, even when everyone agreed on the symptoms and the inevitable outcome, people still could not develop effective treatments or prevention. Knowledge of what happened was not enough. Without understanding why, without seeing the virus, without comprehending that a living organism was invading nerve cells and traveling to the brain, all the accumulated wisdom of centuries could not save a single life. The fear of rabies persisted well into the 20th century. Even after Pasteur's vaccine, before it became widely available, people still died of rabies. And the disease has not been eradicated. In many parts of the world, rabies remains a threat. Globally, it kills tens of thousands of people each year, mostly in Africa and Asia where dog vaccination rates are low and post-exposure treatment is not always accessible. The ancient fear still has basis in modern reality. But for our purposes tonight, as we journey through the pre-scientific age, rabies stands as perhaps the most psychologically devastating of all diseases. Not the greatest killer, not even close. But a disease that attacked the mind as much as the body, that transformed victims into monsters, that left survivors of bites in agonizing uncertainty, waiting to learn if they were doomed. A disease whose transmission was understood but whose cause was completely mysterious. A disease that would not be conquered until the very end of the 19th century, when science finally caught up to a virus that had haunted humanity since the dawn of civilization. While smallpox, plague, and rabies dominated the landscape of historical disease, they were far from alone. The pre-scientific world was filled with mysterious afflictions that struck without warning, killed without mercy, or left survivors marked and changed. Each had its own pattern, its own terror, its own place in the nightmares of our ancestors. Measles, for instance, was another ancient companion of humanity. Like smallpox, it likely emerged as a disease of humans sometime after the development of agriculture and large settled populations. The symptoms were distinctive: fever, cough, runny nose, and then a red rash that spread across the body. Unlike smallpox, measles rarely killed healthy adults, but it was devastating to children. In populations that had lived with measles for generations, it was accepted as a childhood disease, unpleasant but usually survivable. But when measles reached populations without immunity, it killed with the same efficiency as smallpox. The ancient physician Rhazes, working in Baghdad in the 9th century CE, was the first to clearly distinguish measles from smallpox in his medical writings. Before his careful observations, the two diseases were often conflated. Rhazes described measles as beginning with symptoms like a cold, followed by a rash that started on the face and spread to the body. He noted that measles was generally less severe than smallpox but could still be deadly, particularly to the very young. Medieval and Renaissance Europeans accepted measles as an inevitable part of childhood. Most children caught it and recovered. Those who died were mourned, but their deaths were seen as God's will or bad luck. No one understood that measles was caused by a virus or that it spread through airborne droplets when infected people coughed or sneezed. The disease simply came and went in waves, particularly striking communities when enough susceptible children had been born since the last outbreak. Influenza was another mystery. Unlike smallpox or measles, influenza came in waves that affected people of all ages. It would sweep through a community, causing fever, body aches, cough, and exhaustion, then disappear, only to return months or years later in a slightly different form. Most victims recovered, but some, particularly the very young, the elderly, and those with other health problems, died of complications like pneumonia. The word influenza comes from Italian, where it originally meant influence, reflecting the medieval belief that the disease was caused by the influence of the stars or bad air. Major flu epidemics are recorded throughout history. In 1580, what was probably an influenza pandemic spread across Europe, Asia, and Africa, one of the first diseases documented as spreading globally. The symptoms matched what we know as flu: sudden onset of fever, severe body aches, respiratory symptoms. But the flu's ability to return in different forms was deeply puzzling to pre-scientific physicians. Unlike smallpox, where surviving once meant lifelong immunity, people could catch flu multiple times. Why? The answer, of course, is that influenza viruses mutate rapidly, creating new strains that can reinfect people who had immunity to previous versions. But without any conception of viruses or genetics or mutation, this pattern made no sense. It seemed as though the disease itself was somehow different each time, as though it learned and adapted like a living enemy. Leprosy, now known as Hansen's disease, was another disease that struck terror into hearts throughout the ancient and medieval world. Caused by the bacterium Mycobacterium leprae, leprosy is actually not very contagious. It spreads through prolonged close contact with an infected person and has a very long incubation period, sometimes years or decades. But its symptoms were horrifying and visible. Leprosy attacks the nerves, skin, and mucous membranes. It causes lesions and lumps on the skin, particularly on the face. It damages nerves, leading to loss of sensation in the extremities. When people lose feeling in their fingers and toes, they injure themselves without realizing it, leading to infections, tissue death, and eventually the loss of digits. Facial nerves can be damaged, leading to facial deformity. The overall effect was a progressive disfigurement that medieval people found deeply frightening. Biblical references to leprosy, particularly in Leviticus, established it as a disease requiring ritual isolation. Whether the leprosy described in the Bible was actually Hansen's disease or various other skin conditions is debated, but the association was made. Throughout medieval Europe, people with leprosy were required to live apart from society in leprosaria, leper houses, or colonies. They had to wear special clothing, carry bells or clappers to warn of their approach, and were essentially civilly dead, unable to own property or participate in normal society. The fear of leprosy was as much about its visible disfigurement and its association with sin and divine punishment as about contagion. People saw the disease as God's judgment, a mark of moral corruption made visible on the body. This made the suffering of leprosy victims even worse, as they faced not just disease but social death and moral condemnation. Diphtheria was yet another childhood killer whose cause remained mysterious for centuries. The disease typically struck children under 10 years of age, beginning with a sore throat and fever. Then a gray membrane would form in the throat, sometimes spreading to cover the tonsils and the back of the throat. This membrane, which gave the disease its name diphtheria from the Greek word for leather, could block the airway, suffocating the child. Those who survived the airway obstruction might still die from heart failure or paralysis caused by the diphtheria toxin spreading through the body. Before the 20th century, when antitoxin and later vaccine became available, diphtheria killed thousands of children annually in Europe and North America. Parents dreaded it. A child would develop what seemed like a simple sore throat, and within days they could be dead. Physicians could do nothing except try to keep the airway open, sometimes attempting tracheotomy to bypass the blocked throat. The helplessness in the face of childhood death must have been agonizing. Scarlet fever was another bacterial infection, caused by Group A streptococcus, that killed many children. It typically began with a sudden high fever and sore throat, followed by a distinctive red rash that felt like sandpaper and gave the disease its name. Most children recovered, but some developed serious complications: rheumatic fever that damaged the heart, kidney disease, infections that spread to the brain. Like diphtheria, scarlet fever was seen simply as one of the many ways children died before reaching adulthood. Typhus was yet another mystery, a disease that particularly struck in times of war, famine, and crowding. It caused high fever, headache, and a characteristic rash. The name comes from Greek typhos, meaning smoke or stupor, describing the mental confusion that often accompanied the disease. Typhus killed millions throughout history. It struck Napoleon's army during the retreat from Moscow in 1812, killing more soldiers than combat did. It devastated armies and civilian populations throughout the 30 Years' War. It struck refugees, prisoners, and the urban poor with particular severity. The problem was that Fracastoro had no way to prove his theory. He couldn't see these seeds. He couldn't grow them in culture or examine them under a microscope. His theory was based on logical deduction from observation, but it remained speculative. And it competed with the established humoral theory and miasma theory, which seemed to explain disease just as well and had centuries of tradition behind them. The invention of the microscope in the late 16th and early 17th centuries opened a new window onto reality. The Dutch spectacle maker Zacharias Janssen is often credited with creating the first compound microscope around 1595, though the details are murky and others may have contributed. Over the following decades, microscopes improved, and people began examining the world at scales previously impossible. The most famous early microscopist was Anton van Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch cloth merchant who lived from 1632 to 1723. Van Leeuwenhoek was not a scientist or physician by training. He was a tradesman who made microscopes as a hobby, grinding his own lenses with extraordinary skill. His microscopes were simple, essentially powerful magnifying glasses, but they could magnify objects up to 270 times their actual size, better than any compound microscope of his era. Van Leeuwenhoek looked at everything he could find: pond water, blood, his own dental plaque, pepper infusions, semen. And he discovered a world teeming with life invisible to the naked eye. He called these tiny creatures animalcules. We would call many of them bacteria and protozoa. He described their shapes and movements in letters to the Royal Society in London, including careful drawings. He was the first person to see bacteria, observing them in 1676. This was revolutionary. Van Leeuwenhoek had discovered that the world contained living organisms too small to see without magnification. Suddenly, Fracastoro's seeds of disease seemed less speculative. Maybe disease really was caused by these tiny creatures? But the connection wasn't made immediately. Van Leeuwenhoek himself didn't propose that his animalcules caused disease. He was simply reporting what he observed, cataloging the previously invisible world. And his discoveries, while exciting to some, were not immediately incorporated into medical thinking. Physicians continued to rely on humoral theory and miasma theory. The animalcules were a curiosity, not a revolution. Part of the problem was that bacteria and protozoa could be seen with microscopes, but viruses could not. Viruses are far smaller than bacteria, too small to be seen with light microscopes. They wouldn't be visualized until the invention of electron microscopes in the 20th century. So while Van Leeuwenhoek had opened the door to microbiology, he had only seen part of the picture. The viral diseases that killed millions remained completely invisible. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, medicine made some progress. Better anatomy and physiology, better surgical techniques, better hygiene in hospitals, though hospitals were still dangerous places. But the fundamental understanding of infectious disease didn't change much. Physicians observed, documented, categorized, but they didn't understand causes. Edward Jenner's development of vaccination against smallpox in 1796 was revolutionary not because Jenner understood how it worked, but because it worked. Jenner was a country physician in Gloucestershire, England. He noticed that milkmaids who had contracted cowpox, a mild disease that caused sores on the hands, seemed to be immune to smallpox. This was common folk wisdom in rural England, a joke even that milkmaids had lovely complexions because they never got smallpox. Jenner decided to test this observation. In 1796, he took material from a cowpox sore on the hand of a milkmaid named Sarah Nelms and scratched it into the arm of an 8-year-old boy named James Phipps. The boy developed a mild reaction and recovered. Then Jenner did something that would be completely unethical today. He deliberately exposed James Phipps to smallpox. The boy did not develop the disease. He was immune. Jenner published his findings in 1798, coining the term vaccination from vacca, the Latin word for cow. The practice spread rapidly. Vaccination was safer than variolation and just as effective. Within a few decades, it had been adopted across Europe and North America. Jenner's work eventually led to the complete eradication of smallpox, the only human disease ever to be completely eliminated. But Jenner didn't understand why vaccination worked. He didn't know about viruses or the immune system. He simply observed that it worked and promoted its use. The mechanism would not be understood until the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when immunology developed as a science. The 18th century also saw growing attention to public health and epidemiology. Physicians began keeping better records of disease outbreaks, looking for patterns. They noticed correlations between sanitation and disease, between crowding and disease, between poverty and disease. This led to public health reforms, better sewage systems, cleaner water supplies, regulations about food safety and housing conditions. These reforms worked. Death rates, particularly from infectious diseases, began to decline even before the germ theory of disease was established. Clean water prevented cholera even when people didn't understand that cholera was caused by bacteria. Better nutrition and living conditions helped people resist disease even when the mechanisms of immunity were unknown. Empirical observation and pragmatic intervention saved countless lives. But the fundamental mystery remained. What actually caused disease? Physicians and scientists had clues. They knew diseases were often contagious. They knew sanitation mattered. They could see bacteria under microscopes. But they couldn't tie it all together into a coherent explanation that everyone accepted. The breakthrough would come in the second half of the 19th century through the work of several brilliant scientists. Louis Pasteur in France demonstrated that microorganisms caused fermentation and spoilage, disproving the theory of spontaneous generation. He showed that bacteria in wine and milk caused them to spoil and that heating, pasteurization, killed the bacteria and prevented spoilage. He then extended this reasoning to disease, proposing that microorganisms caused illness. Robert Koch in Germany developed methods for growing pure cultures of bacteria and proving that specific bacteria caused specific diseases. In 1876, he proved that Bacillus anthracis caused anthrax. In 1882, he identified Mycobacterium tuberculosis as the cause of tuberculosis. He established what became known as Koch's postulates, a set of criteria for proving that a particular microorganism causes a particular disease. By the 1880s, the germ theory of disease was becoming established. Bacteria had been identified as the causes of anthrax, tuberculosis, cholera, diphtheria, and many other diseases. Antiseptic surgical techniques, pioneered by Joseph Lister, dramatically reduced deaths from infections after surgery. The understanding of infectious disease was being revolutionized. But viruses remained elusive. In the late 19th century, scientists discovered that some infectious agents could pass through filters fine enough to trap bacteria. The filtered fluid could still cause disease, meaning something smaller than bacteria was responsible. The term virus was applied to these filterable infectious agents, from the Latin word meaning poison or toxin. The first disease proven to be caused by a virus was tobacco mosaic disease, affecting tobacco plants. In 1892, Russian scientist Dmitry Ivanovsky showed that the agent causing this disease could pass through bacterial filters. In 1898, Dutch microbiologist Martinus Beijerinck confirmed this and proposed that the infectious agent was not a bacterium but something else, which he called a contagious living fluid. Yellow fever, foot and mouth disease in cattle, and eventually human diseases like smallpox and rabies were shown to be caused by these filterable agents. But viruses themselves couldn't be seen or grown in pure culture like bacteria could. They remained mysterious, definable only by what they were not and by their effects. Electron microscopes, developed in the 1930s, finally allowed direct visualization of viruses. Scientists could at last see the enemies that had plagued humanity for thousands of years. They were not living in the traditional sense, not cells but tiny particles consisting of genetic material wrapped in protein. They could not reproduce on their own but hijacked host cells to make copies of themselves. They were simpler and smaller than any bacteria, and far harder to fight. The full understanding of viruses and the development of effective vaccines and treatments mostly occurred in the 20th century, outside our timeline tonight. But the journey to get there, the thousands of years of observation, hypothesis, trial and error, brilliant insights and wrong turns, all of that shaped the history of medicine and the history of humanity. To truly understand what life was like before the scientific understanding of disease, we must step away from physicians and scholars for a moment and think about ordinary people. The farmers and craftsmen, the mothers and fathers, the children who grew up in a world where invisible terrors could strike at any moment without warning or explanation. Imagine being a parent in medieval Europe or ancient China or colonial America. Your children are born healthy and beautiful, filling your home with life and noise. But you know, with grim certainty, that some of them will not reach adulthood. Disease will take them. You don't know which ones. You don't know when. You can pray, provide the best care you can, follow folk remedies and physicians' advice, but ultimately you are helpless before forces beyond your comprehension or control. When illness strikes, you do what you can. You might call for a healer, if you can afford one. They might bleed the child, trying to balance the humors. They might prescribe herbs and poultices. They might examine urine or astrological charts. Some remedies might actually help through mechanisms no one understood. Willow bark tea for fever and pain. Honey to soothe coughs and fight infection. Clean water and rest. Others were useless or actively harmful. But mostly, you wait. You sit beside the bed of your feverish child and wait to see if they will recover or die. You pray to whatever gods you believe in, begging for mercy. You make bargains and vows. You watch the symptoms develop, the rash spreading, the breathing becoming labored, and you know these might be the last days you have with your child. If your child develops smallpox, you watch the pustules bloom across their small body. You try to ease their pain while being careful not to break the pustules, which might cause worse scarring. You manage the fever. You pray that it's the milder form of the disease, variola minor, rather than the deadly variola major. You wait through the long weeks of the disease's course, and if your child survives, you are grateful even as you mourn the scars they will carry forever. If plague comes to your community, you might try to flee. Wealthy families often left cities during plague outbreaks, retreating to country estates where they hoped the disease would not follow. But most people couldn't flee. They had nowhere to go, no means to leave. They stayed and hoped. They avoided the sick if possible. They prayed and trusted to fate. If your child is bitten by a potentially rabid animal, you face an agonizing wait. Weeks or months might pass before you know if they will develop symptoms. You might try the folk remedies, the cauterization, the mad stones, knowing they probably won't work but desperate to do something. And if symptoms appear, you know what's coming. You might even face the horrible choice of whether to ease your child's suffering by ending their life before the worst of the disease takes hold. As we move into the 17th and 18th centuries, the pace of change began to accelerate. The Renaissance had sparked a new spirit of inquiry. The Protestant Reformation had weakened the Church's monopoly on learning. The printing press had made knowledge more widely available. Scientists were beginning to observe nature more systematically, to question ancient authorities, to conduct experiments. The invention of the microscope was perhaps the single most important development for the eventual understanding of infectious disease. Suddenly, a world invisible to the naked eye became visible. The Dutch lens grinder Anton van Leeuwenhoek, as we have seen, discovered animalcules teeming in water, in blood, in dental plaque. He wrote detailed letters to the Royal Society in London, describing what he saw with wonder and precision. In 1676, van Leeuwenhoek observed what we now know were bacteria. He described their shapes, some long and thin like rods, others round like spheres, still others spiral. He watched them move, propelling themselves through the water with appendages he couldn't quite make out. He estimated their size, recognizing that many thousands could fit in a single drop of water. This was revolutionary. The world contained living things too small to see. But what did this mean? Van Leeuwenhoek himself didn't connect his observations to disease. He was simply documenting the natural world, expanding human knowledge. The animalcules were fascinating curiosities, but their significance for human health was not immediately apparent. Part of the problem was that not all diseases are caused by bacteria. Many, as we now know, are caused by viruses, which are far smaller than bacteria and completely invisible even with the best microscopes of van Leeuwenhoek's era. So even as microscopy advanced, the viral diseases remained mysterious. Another problem was theoretical. Even as scientists observed microorganisms, the prevailing theories of disease were still humoral theory and miasma theory. These frameworks had centuries of tradition behind them. They seemed to explain disease adequately. Why should tiny organisms matter when disease was caused by imbalanced humors or bad air? Still, observant physicians were noting patterns that didn't quite fit the old theories. They observed that diseases seemed to spread from person to person. That sailors coming from tropical ports brought yellow fever to northern cities. That disease followed trade routes. That epidemics struck cities more severely than the countryside. These observations suggested contagion, the transmission of something from sick people to healthy people. Girolamo Fracastoro's 16th century theory of disease seeds was revived and discussed, though not widely accepted. If disease was transmitted from person to person, perhaps Fracastoro was right that seeds too small to see were responsible. And now, with Van Leeuwenhoek's discovery of animalcules, there was evidence that such tiny organisms existed. But connecting observation to theory proved difficult. The relationship between microorganisms and disease was not obvious. After all, healthy people's bodies teemed with microorganisms. Van Leeuwenhoek found them in his own mouth. If these creatures caused disease, why wasn't everyone constantly sick? The answer, as we now know, is that most microorganisms are harmless or even beneficial. Only specific pathogenic organisms cause disease. And many factors affect whether exposure to a pathogen results in illness: the person's immune system, their overall health, the dose of pathogen, and so on. But these complexities made the connection between microbes and disease harder to see. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, medicine remained caught between old theories and new observations that didn't quite fit. Physicians still practiced bloodletting and purging based on humoral theory. They still warned patients about bad air and recommended moving to healthier climates. But they also noticed that some interventions worked even when they shouldn't according to theory. Isolation of sick people helped prevent disease spread, suggesting contagion rather than miasma. Cleaning and disinfecting contaminated areas reduced illness. Improving sanitation in cities lowered disease rates. These empirical observations were saving lives even when the underlying mechanisms weren't understood. Edward Jenner's work on vaccination, published in 1798, was a watershed moment. Jenner had observed that milkmaids who contracted the mild disease cowpox seemed immune to the deadly disease smallpox. He tested this observation systematically. He deliberately infected people with cowpox and then exposed them to smallpox, demonstrating that the cowpox infection provided protection. Jenner called his technique vaccination, from the Latin vacca meaning cow. He didn't understand why it worked. He didn't know about viruses or the immune system. He simply observed that it did work and promoted its use vigorously. Within a few years, vaccination spread across Europe into the Americas. Deaths from smallpox began to decline dramatically. The success of vaccination was undeniable, but it also raised profound questions. How could one disease protect against another? Why did the mild cowpox provide immunity to the deadly smallpox? The mechanisms remained completely mysterious, yet the technique worked. This was frustrating for scientists who wanted to understand why things worked, not just that they worked. But Jenner's success also demonstrated the power of careful observation and experimentation. By systematically testing a hypothesis based on folk wisdom, Jenner had developed a life-saving intervention. This became a model for how medical progress could be made even without complete theoretical understanding. The 19th century brought accelerating change. The Industrial Revolution transformed cities, packing millions of people into crowded urban areas with inadequate sanitation. disease struck these cities with devastating force. Cholera epidemics swept through Europe in wave after wave, killing thousands. Tuberculosis became the leading cause of death in many cities. Typhoid, typhus, and other infectious diseases thrived in the unsanitary conditions. But these crises also spurred innovation. Public health reformers pushed for better sanitation, cleaner water, improved housing. Edwin Chadwick in Britain advocated for comprehensive sanitary reforms. His 1842 report on the sanitary condition of the laboring population documented the connection between poverty, filth, and disease, calling for massive infrastructure improvements. Cities began building proper sewage systems and water supplies. London's Great Sewer System, completed in the 1860s, transformed the city's health. Similar projects in other cities had similar effects. Death rates fell. Life expectancy rose. These improvements predated the full understanding of disease causation but were based on the correct empirical observation that sanitation mattered. In 1854, during a cholera outbreak in London, the physician John Snow conducted brilliant epidemiological detective work. He mapped cases of cholera in the Soho district and noticed they clustered around a particular public water pump on Broad Street. He convinced authorities to remove the pump handle, making the pump unusable. New cases of cholera dropped sharply. Snow proposed that cholera was transmitted through contaminated water, not through bad air as miasma theory suggested. His work was controversial and not immediately accepted, but it was an early example of epidemiology, using patterns of disease distribution to identify causes and develop interventions. Snow didn't know what contaminated the water. The bacterium Vibrio cholerae wouldn't be identified for another 30 years, but he correctly identified the transmission route. The mid-19th century also saw the development of anesthesia and antiseptic surgery. Ether and chloroform allowed surgeons to operate on unconscious patients who didn't feel pain, making complex surgeries possible for the first time. But patients still died at high rates from infections after surgery. Joseph Lister, a Scottish surgeon, was influenced by Louis Pasteur's work showing that microorganisms caused fermentation and spoilage. Lister reasoned that if microorganisms could cause wine to spoil, perhaps they could also cause wounds to become infected. In the 1860s, he began using carbolic acid to sterilize surgical instruments and clean wounds. The results were dramatic. Death rates from post-surgical infection plummeted. Lister's antiseptic technique was revolutionary, but it faced resistance from surgeons who didn't believe in microorganisms or who found the carbolic acid sprays and hand washing inconvenient. But the evidence was undeniable. Patients treated with antiseptic techniques survived at much higher rates. Gradually, antiseptic and later aseptic techniques became standard practice. All of these developments were pushing toward a fundamental transformation in understanding disease. The old theories were breaking down. The evidence for contagion, for microorganisms as causes of disease, was mounting. What was needed was a comprehensive theory that tied everything together and rigorous proof that specific microorganisms caused specific diseases. That proof would come from the work of Louis Pasteur in France and Robert Koch in Germany. Through the 1860s, 1870s, and 1880s, these men and their colleagues would establish the germ theory of disease on unshakable foundations. They would identify the bacteria causing anthrax, tuberculosis, cholera, and many other diseases. They would develop techniques for growing bacteria in pure culture and for proving that a particular organism caused a particular disease. But even as bacteria were being identified, viruses remained elusive. Tobacco mosaic disease, yellow fever, foot and mouth disease in cattle. These diseases were shown to be caused by something that could pass through filters fine enough to trap all bacteria. These filterable agents or viruses could not be seen or cultured like bacteria. They remained mysterious entities, definable only by what they were not and by the diseases they caused. Smallpox, measles, influenza, rabies, all were eventually shown to be viral diseases. But the viruses themselves would not be visualized until the development of electron microscopes in the 1930s and 1940s. Only then could scientists finally see the enemies that had killed millions throughout history. Tiny, simple structures, not quite alive, that hijacked living cells to reproduce. The full understanding of viruses, their structure, their life cycles, their variation, developed throughout the 20th century. The development of viral vaccines, the discovery of antiviral drugs, the eventual eradication of smallpox, these triumphs of modern medicine all came after the period of our story tonight. But they were built on foundations laid by centuries of observation, by physicians and healers who documented symptoms and disease courses even when they couldn't identify causes, by the development of microscopy, by the recognition that disease was often contagious, by public health reforms that saved lives even before their mechanisms were understood, by Jenner's vaccination, by Snow's epidemiology, by Lister's antiseptic technique. The journey from ignorance to understanding was long and difficult, marked by false starts and wrong theories, by superstition and brilliant insight intermingled. But gradually, painstakingly, humanity learned to see the invisible, to understand forces beyond perception, and ultimately to develop weapons against diseases that had plagued our species since its beginnings. As we come to the end of our journey tonight, let us pause and reflect on what we have witnessed. For 1,000 years of human history, countless millions of lives touched by diseases whose causes remained hidden in the realm of the invisible. Civilizations reshaped by plagues. Families torn apart by fevers and pustules and mysterious deaths. We have stood beside ancient Mesopotamians who believed demons caused disease. We have watched Greek physicians balance humors that never existed. We have walked through medieval streets fouled with waste, where people believed bad air carried death. We have seen the pustules of smallpox bloom across faces, across continents, across millennia. We have watched the Black Death empty cities, leaving silence where there had been life. We have felt the terror of rabies, the invisible enemy that destroyed minds before taking lives. But we have also witnessed resilience. The healers who tried everything they could imagine to ease suffering. The mothers and fathers who nursed sick children through long nights. The communities that came together to care for the sick even at risk to themselves. The brilliant minds who observed patterns, developed theories, created interventions that saved lives even when they didn't fully understand why. The story of humanity's relationship with disease before scientific understanding is not simply a story of ignorance or superstition. It is a story of courage in the face of the inexplicable, of compassion for the suffering, of determination to survive and to protect those we love even when forces beyond our comprehension threaten to destroy us. Think of what it meant to live in that world. To watch a child develop fever and know there was nothing you could truly do except wait and hope and pray. To see pustules spread across their small body and understand this might be the last time you see them whole. To witness a plague sweep through your city, taking neighbor after neighbor, and wonder if you or your family would be next. The fear must have been overwhelming at times. But so was the love. The determination to care for the sick. The refusal to abandon those suffering even at risk of contagion. The passing down of knowledge, however limited, to the next generation in hope that perhaps they would understand more, perhaps they would find better ways to heal. And they did. Generation by generation, the accumulated knowledge grew. Observation led to theory. Theory was tested against experience. Some ideas were discarded when they didn't work. Others were refined and improved. Slowly, painstakingly, understanding advanced. The breakthrough came not through sudden revelation but through centuries of work by countless individuals. Every physician who documented symptoms. Every healer who noted which remedies seemed to help. Every midwife who observed patterns of disease. Every microscopist who described newly visible organisms. Every reformer who pushed for cleaner water and better sanitation. Every scientist who tested hypotheses with careful experiments. They all contributed to the eventual understanding that disease was caused by microorganisms, by invisible life forms that could invade the body and multiply, causing illness and death. That some diseases were caused by bacteria, which could be seen with microscopes and grown in cultures. That others were caused by viruses, even smaller, stranger things that existed at the boundary between life and non-life. And with understanding came power. The power to prevent disease through vaccination. To treat bacterial infections with antibiotics. To identify disease outbreaks and trace their sources. To develop public health measures that save millions of lives. To eventually eradicate smallpox completely from the earth, something that would have seemed like an impossible dream to our ancestors who lived in terror of the disease. We live in a world transformed by this knowledge. We live longer, healthier lives than people in any previous era. Childhood diseases that once killed half of all children are now preventable with vaccines. Bacterial infections that once meant certain death can be cured with pills. We can identify new diseases, trace their spread, develop responses with speed unimaginable to previous generations. But we should not forget how recently this transformation occurred. It was only in the late 19th century that the germ theory of disease became established. Only in the 20th century that antibiotics and widespread vaccination became available. Within living memory, diseases like polio terrified parents across the world. The complete eradication of smallpox was achieved only in 1980, barely more than 40 years ago. And we should remember that the battle is not over. New infectious diseases continue to emerge. Old ones resurge when vigilance falters. Viruses mutate and evolve, creating new challenges. The invisible world teems with microorganisms, most harmless but some deadly, all evolving alongside us. The story we have explored tonight is not just history. It is a reminder of where we came from, of the long struggle that brought us to where we are today. It is a testament to human resilience, ingenuity, and compassion. It is a memorial to the countless millions who died of diseases we now can prevent or cure, whose suffering helped pave the way to greater understanding. As you drift towards sleep tonight, carry these thoughts gently. The mystery of disease that haunted our ancestors for millennia has been largely solved, though mysteries remain. The invisible has been made visible. The inexplicable has been explained. And the weapons that once seemed beyond human reach have been forged through centuries of observation, thought, and experiment. But we owe something to those who came before. To the healers who tried despite ignorance. To the parents who grieved children lost to invisible enemies. To the communities that faced plagues with courage even when they had no weapons but hope and prayer. We owe them memory. Remembrance of what they endured. Recognition of what they taught us through their suffering and their observations. We owe them gratitude for the knowledge they preserved and passed down, even when incomplete. For the compassion they showed to the sick even at risk to themselves. For the resilience that kept humanity going through plague and pestilence, through the dark centuries when disease seemed like divine judgment or demonic possession, when invisible forces struck without warning and killed without mercy. And we owe them the commitment to continue their work, to use our knowledge wisely, to ensure that everyone, everywhere, has access to the fruits of scientific understanding, to remain vigilant against new threats, to remember that the invisible world is always with us, that vigilance is the price of health, that knowledge hard-won can be lost if not maintained and passed on. The story of humanity and disease is ultimately a story of hope. Hope that what seems mysterious today may be understood tomorrow. That what seems impossible today may become routine tomorrow. That suffering can be alleviated. That knowledge can be won from experience. That human ingenuity and compassion can triumph over forces that once seemed unstoppable. Our ancestors lived and died in a world where invisible enemies killed without explanation. We live in a world where those enemies have been seen, understood, and in many cases conquered. But the victory was not quick or easy. It took millennia. It cost millions of lives. It required countless acts of courage, compassion, and brilliance. So as you rest tonight, let gratitude fill your heart. Gratitude for the healers and scientists and reformers who built the world we live in. For the knowledge that protects us. For the vaccines that prevent disease. For the treatments that cure infection. For the understanding that dispels terror. And let compassion fill your heart as well. Compassion for those who lived before this understanding existed. Who faced disease with only faith and hope. Who lost loved ones to invisible enemies. Who suffered in ways we can barely imagine. Who never knew why the mysterious afflictions came or how to prevent them. Their mystery has been largely solved. The viruses and bacteria that killed them have been identified, visualized, studied. But the human cost of those millennia of ignorance remains real. The suffering was real. The fear was real. The loss was real. We cannot change the past. Cannot bring back those lost to smallpox or plague or rabies or the countless other diseases that swept through human populations for thousands of years. But we can remember. We can honor their memory by using the knowledge we now possess wisely and compassionately. by working to ensure that no one suffers from preventable disease, by maintaining the vigilance and the research that keeps invisible enemies at bay. The story that began in darkness has emerged into light. The invisible has become visible. The mysterious has been explained. And humanity, which endured 4,000 years of plague and pestilence with courage and compassion, now possesses the knowledge to prevent or cure most infectious diseases. This is the triumph of science, the victory of observation, hypothesis, experimentation, and evidence over superstition and ignorance. But it is also the triumph of the human spirit, the refusal to accept suffering as inevitable, the determination to understand, the compassion to care for the sick even when caring meant risking death, the courage to face invisible enemies with nothing but hope. And so we honor them tonight. All those who came before, all who suffered, all who healed, all who sought understanding even in darkness, all who contributed, whether they knew it or not, to the eventual victory over diseases that had haunted humanity since the dawn of civilization. Rest now, and let these stories fade into dreams. Let the images soften and blur. The ancient physicians checking their patients' urine. The medieval villages marked by plague. The mothers nursing sick children through long nights. The scientists peering through microscopes at invisible worlds. All of them part of one long story, one journey from darkness into light, from mystery into understanding. The invisible has been made visible. The inexplicable has been explained. And you rest tonight in a world transformed by centuries of courage, compassion, and the relentless human drive to understand. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with gratitude for the knowledge that protects you, and compassion for those who lived and died before that knowledge existed. Good night.